Welcome to another episode of the Say It Sister podcast, brought to you by Wise Women Lead founders Karen Harris-Kelly and Lucy Barkus.
This is your space for real, unfiltered conversations about womanhood, the messy, the magical, and everything in between.
We're here to talk about existing, thriving, and empowering ourselves and each other by connecting to our experiences and truths, and saying them out loud, so that we can feel and heal. We're called upon to name the taboos, stigmas, stereotypes, and lies that keep us stuck, so we can rise and reign like queens.
Because when women share, we hold space, inspire action, and create change. We open up spaces and deepen relationships that bring us closer to love and a better world for all. So get comfy, grab your favourite drink, and let's say it, sister. Welcome back to Say It Sister. This week we have a guest and we are talking about the toxic trait that shows up in the Queen Bee syndrome. You know, that idea that women in leadership sometimes hold other women back instead of lifting them up. The idea that mean girls and those alpha bitches are these legendary archetypes. But we're going to add a little bit of zest to this topic that can often have a bit of a sting to it. So we're going to welcome Rachael Lemon, who is the founder of LemonAiding, an editor-in-chief of EmpowHER magazine, a rebel coach who teaches women to stop fitting in and start standing out, a domestic abuse thriver, speaker and leadership disruptor. She brings lemony snippet, truth bombs and zero tolerance for workplace dynamics that pit women against each other. We're not going to just talk about the problem, we're exploring how to create a sisterhood in the workplace. But before we say hello to Rachael, I want to say, hey, Karen.
Hey, I am very happy to be here today, and I'm so excited to have Rachael with us because we have all been messaging each other for months now, and just to have the three of us in one room is going to be incredible. So happy. And I love the idea of lemonade, the idea of, adding that zing, adding that truth, putting it all together and creating something that is just so yummy, because that's what we want. We want more of the joy, we want more of the connection. But let's start with the basics, Rachael. Tell everyone a little bit about you and why you do the work you do.
So my background is in healthcare, and 30 odd years, started pharmacy, but worked a lot in, gone in leadership, professional leadership, national leadership, represented my profession on the English Pharmacy Board at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. So I've experienced, and I started that kind of, I suppose they would call it political back then, but I started that kind of journey quite young. And so I was like very often the only woman in the room. And so, and in some ways it hasn't changed or it's gone back to how it was. But there was also this very much, you would have hoped that the other women in the room, when they were there, would be your advocate. And they absolutely weren't. And the older I get, the more I reflect on how many women in my career actually haven't helped me get where I wanted to go. They've actually done the opposite. And I've always been fascinated by the behaviors behind people. I think it's easy to blame people, but actually it's more understanding the behaviors, like why do people behave like that? And I think when we talk about Queen Bee syndrome in particular, it's kind of, it is fear, isn't it? So there's a group of women that have fought so hard to get to where they've got, that their mindset is like, I'm not going to risk my position by letting anybody else join me, rather than the kind of behaviour and sisterhood that we want, where it's kind of like, yeah, I worked really hard to get here and now I'm going to make sure everyone else gets it in. Because the more voices, diverse voices, not just women, but diverse voices in general that we have, the better leadership will be. Because leadership isn't the old white boys club anymore. Like times have changed, and the way we lead needs to change. We don't need top-down leadership. We need inclusive leadership. We need compassionate leadership more than ever. And as in healthcare especially, you would expect that to be the norm. Like caring profession. And so the aid part of the lemonade is actually kind of from aid as in first aid.
It's like that idea of leaving the ladder down, but I always go into the place of something has happened to that woman to create this behavior. And I had a really bad boss. I'm going back to being sort of 31, and I moved to London from Leeds and joined this huge agency that was one of the biggest independent agencies in the world. And my boss was a woman, and I never encountered anyone quite like this woman before. And she basically bullied all the women in her department. She had a big department, and I was an associate director, and there were 2 other female associate directors. She was here, and there was the 3 of us here, and then cascaded down. The men, she was like fawning all over, the men in the department, but the 3 of us were just getting like targeted. And I remember we had like these old phones, and she would call up, and you'd see her pick the phone up from the bottom of the room, and we'd sit with each other, the 3 women, and you'd think, oh, please don't make my phone call, like don't let that ring. And then you'd pick up the phone, and she'd be like, can you come in here now? And we'd all be like, oh my God, and systematically she broke us all down, and then one of my colleagues, she was losing her hair, her teeth were falling out. I mean, it was really, really bad. And I remember thinking, I used to think I was creative. I used to think I was good at my job, but I actually don't think I'm very good at all. Maybe I was just lucky. And it was like the breaking down of me was huge in my life. And I remember thinking, please get me out of here. And I don't know how to get out. And I was calling home saying, I think I need to leave. And they were like, just hang in there. You'll be fine. You're brilliant at your job. And I was like, no, it's not right. And then the thing that got me out was I got hit by a car. And that's how bad it was. And there was 9 months of, my voice is starting to close down, but 9 months of hell. And this woman is still in the business, and she's still doing what she's doing. And, that was over 20 years ago now. And it still has the same sort of effect on me, but I actually learned how to stand up for myself after that happened, once I got over the getting hit by the car. So I'd just love to hear your take on that, and what you would say to that woman and to that business who's employing her.
I think as well, like, I don't know if you found, but like in that situation, you were probably, instead of then the 3 of you being like in solidarity, there was also a subconscious thing of trying to not be the person who's being picked on. Yeah. And we don't talk about, that kind of part of the culture where it's like you said, that dreading the phone call or being called into the office, but also then sometimes that relief that we don't want to admit, like, I'm just glad it's her, not me today, because I literally had enough. And being able to, I think that kind of like allyship is really important, isn't it? Because if we don't have allies in that situation, then everybody's just surviving, which is understandable, because when you're in a situation like that, and, sadly, I speak to so many women today who are in exactly that same position. And to the point, I've had a few people this year where they have been like, they can only see the way out of it as taking their life. And this is awful, isn't it? Because this is ultimately, like, we've all had life-changing experiences where we realise a job's just a job, but it shouldn't get to the point where you've had that bad accident or I've lost everything, or, we should be able to know we're all educated, we've all studied for years, we've worked really hard, we've done the leadership courses, we've done all of the training, we've always made an effort. And I think most women are like that, aren't they? And we also have to remember that women as well are generally the caregivers to their children, their parents, whoever. So sometimes before you've even got to work, you've done a full-time job. And, and then, menopause, so it's Menopause Awareness Month as well, isn't it? That actually women can be blimmin' exhausted. That's before you've even got into the battlefield that's work. Yeah. And so just having that, I think we can learn to have boundaries, and we can learn to kind of have those difficult conversations, and also, put in that kind of like, I'd rather you didn't speak to me like that, but also teach each other to be allies, and kind of like, when somebody does talk over you, because it's those subtle kind of undermining things that really start to make you question your sanity, aren't they? That brilliant idea that you had that you put forward to your boss, and she's kind of shushed you out the office, told you it's rubbish, and then the next staff meeting, she's had a brilliant idea, and everyone's like, yay, and you're like, oh, okay. So I think even sometimes, if we notice it at work, if we're in a leadership position ourselves, then I think we've got responsibility to call it out, not necessarily in public, but we can start that conversation with the person. But again, if you're in around a board meeting and somebody's being a bully, I think we can, I would feel confident enough to say, look, actually, that's not okay way to speak to somebody. Or, I've worked with some really brilliant pharmacist who literally people have not acknowledged that she spoke. And then 5 minutes later, somebody else has said what she said. And I've been like, excuse me, but that's what she just said 5 minutes ago. Like, did none of you hear that? And so being able, confident enough to call that out at that level. But when we are like, so you're talking about being 30. And so that's a kind of weird age, isn't it, for us career-wise, because we've done the uni thing, we've established ourselves, and then we are getting into that kind of, I'm ready to be in a leadership or senior role. And that's when, if your confidence gets knocked at that age, it takes a long time to bring it back up.
Loving the conversation? Make sure you follow us on your favourite podcast app, and if something resonates, share it on your socials or with a friend who needs to hear it.
We'd love to hear your stories too. Find us on Instagram at Say It Sister Podcasters and Wise Women Lead, and let's keep the conversation going, because your voice matters here.
There's another perspective I just want to bring in, and it's like, why are some women behaving this way? And I think from what I've seen in my experience, the women are doing it because of fear, and I think one of you named that earlier. But I've known many men behave like this, and it's dismissed as leadership, or that's their dominant character. And then when a woman does it, we kind of take notice, because like, well, that's not very feminine, or that's not very womanly. And so it takes us off guard for a start, because they're not being sisterly. But equally for them to be taken seriously in the boardroom, they need to put on this tough alpha exterior just to be able to survive. And historically, that's the role models that got to the top. And you look at a lot of women in the 80s and 90s, they had to be tougher than the men to be able to survive in that environment. And then other generations coming through are seeing, oh, that's how women have to get ahead. And so they're just mimicking the only role models that they've ever had. But when you take that woman, that tough queen bee, out of that environment and talk to her as a one-on-one human being, you realise that actually she's just the same as all of us. She's just learnt this set of skills as a survival technique. And part of the work that we do is to show them another way, that actually you can be strong and powerful by supporting and creating collaboration and partnerships and being bigger supporters. You don't have to join the boys, you can lead in a completely different way. And I'm just curious about, from both of you, about what other things do you think might be driving that? That's me from a social scientist point of view and social conditioning. But what else might be going on to make women behave like this?
So I think we've established fear definitely, and fear of not being accepted. Because you've had to work that extra bit harder to get the seat at the table, whatever level of management it is, whether it's a management role or once we start going to board level, women are less, like in healthcare. I think the World Health Organization says only 13% of CEOs are women. Yet in healthcare, the global workforce is probably 70 to 80% female. So the misrepresentation is huge. So those women, we are still in a minority when we get to that level. And I think there's two things you said. So I work in energy, like masculine and feminine energy, and I work with some brilliant men who lead with a more feminine energy rather than a masculine energy. I think there's some women that generally they have masculine energy and that's how they lead. And then there's other women that are actually beautifully soft feminine leaders, but once they get there, they realize, wow, this is tough. I'm going to have to act in a certain way to fit in. And those people then are the people that come to us because for coaching, support and mentorship, etc., because they're completely out of alignment of who they are. Yeah. And they don't want to be that person. And I think, there's a lot of women that have been in that position where they've had to, mask, or they've had to fit in with the boys or fit in with the people at the table already. Otherwise, they feel like they're not going to get seen and heard.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that, because it's also this idea of going to war. And me and Lucy have talked about this many times. But so many of the women I work with, they have their armour, and they go into, and they've got high purpose, driving them. So they're very, very purposeful. They're actually very, very caring, but they have done like 54 years of like going and fighting for everything, to get that result, to create that amazing product campaign, to make sure the team are taken care of. And they're fighting all the time. They also don't have a space to actually go and talk about the real stuff, the things that are going on in their life. And that is something that I see now. There's a bigger need more than ever for women to have, coaches, expertise, where they can just go and take all of the armor off, take the mask off and say, I have this fear at the moment and I'm really concerned about this, or this is going on in my private life and it's really affecting me and it's making me want to, not go into the office, or whatever it might be, so that they can take care of their own inner needs and they can really, listen to what's going on in their own bodies, and they can get support and also learn how to regulate themselves as they're going out doing their leadership jobs. Because when they're regulated, their energy is going to shift things around for the people around them. And this is, I suppose you could have called it new age back in the day, but it's not new age anymore. People have really woken up since COVID to the fact that we have to take care of ourselves and our well-being is essential. And our stress levels have such a huge impact, outside of our bodies. So that's the big one for me. And I think when women have the space and the time that's dedicated and they take it, then there's big shifts that happen internally, which then shift everything on the outside. But, I suppose I'm thinking about the woman that I had the experience with. She was so stressed out of her mind. She was swearing. She used to sit at her desk and drink wine. If she could have had a cigarette in there, she would have done. I think, it was like this kind of really, really very, very toxic. So I used to look at her and think, I wasn't a coach then, but I used to think, oh my God, something really bad's happened to you, because this is not like the way you are showing up is, so crazy and wild. But the companies who hire these people have a huge responsibility, is what I would say, to say, actually, this person might be brilliant at her job because there's a reason she's in that seat. However, the way she's showing up, the way that she's behaving, because if I can see it, you can see it, is not acceptable. And therefore we need to do something. So we need to offer her the support and then go down the line with that. So that's really what I think companies have a responsibility to support women. And then there's also the hard conversations that need to be had as well.
And fear, again, comes back to fear, but having staff that fear you is not being a good leader.
No.
Having staff that on Friday night are already dreading Monday, because it used to be Sunday, but now we speak to people, and some of the people I worked last year, like one didn't take a holiday because she was so scared of what it would feel like when she came back, that she just didn't take her annual leave. So she was just like, I'd rather just keep that even keel of this is bad, but if I take a week or 2 weeks off, it's going to be even worse. So I think there's a fear of kind of letting go for a lot of people, isn't there? There's a big fear of delegation, because like you said, you've got all of that responsibility on you. As a leader, you're accountable, aren't you? And I think maybe accountable and responsible are different things that we need to dig into, not necessarily now, but as women ourselves, what does accountability mean? And also empowering people and being able to delegate, because maybe sometimes it's because we can't trust ourselves, that we don't trust our teams to do stuff. But by doing that, then we create a culture where people don't get to grow. And I know in the past, like you just made me think about, we had a pharmacy manager at the time, and she was always angry, and we had these like great big books back then, talking before mobile phones and apps, data sheet compendiums that had every drug ever, invented was in this book. And the book was huge. And one of my colleagues, another girl, she'd made a mistake of dispensing. And this leader that we had, she came out and she threw this massive book at her.
Wow.
And it was huge. I mean, it could be assault, but and all the pills just flew up in the air, and everybody was just stunned into silence. And again, it's that, I think when you're in a culture like that, it's that kind of, I'm just glad it's not me that had the book thrown at them.
I have to say, I've never, but in both of your stories, I've never experienced anything like that. I've never experienced anyone losing it or throwing or intimidating in that way. What I do tend to see though is, and I'll go back to like the word, the mean girl behaviors. And that's like, we all know that men and women deal with conflict differently. And which is why we had like the mean girls in the schoolyard calling each other's names and forming cliques and silos and falling out and saying you're not my friend and excluding. And that's a very feminine way that we learn in the school playground. And then for some reason a lot of people don't, or a lot of women don't unlearn that, and so therefore they take it into the workplace. And I just want to share a story with you about like a mean girl who I met. And actually I didn't realize she was a mean girl. She was my colleague, so we were on the same level, and we were civil to each other. We'd meet in those monthly meetings and stuff like that. But I could always get a vibe from her. And she was totally the professional type. She would always wear the right clothes. She would never joke around or anything. Complete professional on every way, to the point where it was like she's kind of soulless. It just didn't. There was no warmth coming from her. Anyway, we got on like colleagues do. And then there was a promotion, and I was asked to go for the promotion, and I didn't really want it, but I went along anyway. And it was in this hotel, and I was sat there in the lobby waiting to go into the interview, and she'd walked out, and I hadn't realised she'd also either been asked or she put herself up for the job. And the minute she clocked me, everything changed from that moment on. And she started telling tales about me, spinning gossip, trying to turn other people against me. And it was absolutely ridiculous, to the one point where she was trying to make out that I was a misogynist and I was racist. And anybody who knows me knows that's just not in my DNA. And so people were then starting to come to me and say, do you know she's saying these things about you and stuff? And I just dealt with it head on, and because I have my boundaries, and I just confronted her and I said, look, what's the beef? And she couldn't explain it. And I think that is probably more insidious than what we see more in workplaces, that kind of mean girl spirit to try and keep that queen bee superiority kind of status. But I may be wrong. It might just be that I've been lucky and I've never seen that all out horrendous people like you've just both shared. What are your thoughts on that?
It can be subtle, can't it? There can be the subtle forms, and then there's a more overt, that is very, very obvious. And I don't know which is. I don't think there's any. I don't think it's about.
Oh, they're both bad.
Or any of that. But either way, you're facing something, and either way, it has a direct impact on you. And I think if anyone listening to this, it's about focusing on the impact on you. So if you're feeling something, I always go into like how to help one person. But if you're feeling it, then you're feeling it, and therefore something's happening. And from my lessons of learning, it's like, listen to your instinct and your intuition, and don't wait. Just take an action, do something, and keep acting until you're through that door. Whatever that looks like, it might be that you're staying in the organisation, but you've gone and had a conversation with HR. If somebody's showing up in a certain way, generally there's a backlog behind. So if we align in the right ways, I love that you spoke directly to her. That's very powerful, but not everyone, has the courage to do that. So
I also think because it was more subtle, it wasn't so overt, it didn't feel too much of a stretch. And I went in with that curiosity, just say, hey, I've heard this. Yeah. Is this true? Because it was that passive aggressive style rather than all out. And I don't know if I'd have handled it the same way had it have been an all out, bitch fest.
So that comes back to what I call when I talk about Queen Bee, like the scarcity mindset. So there was like one position and you were both vying for the same thing. So that's when her kind of Queen Bee started to sting, was like, she's now my threat. Before you were just like someone who maybe she was indifferent to, but once you became a threat to her career progression, that's when she kind of got the stingers out and kind of, made life, like you said, that undermining behaviour, etc. And I think that's when we do, like you said, because you had allies, people that came and said, like, Lucy, I know you, that's not who you are. But there's also those workplaces where no one tells you, or you have people whispering in corners, and then that's the horrible bit, isn't it? That's when the kind of bullying and the gaslighting, and you do start to question yourself. Or if you are brave enough to say to somebody, was that about me? And they're all like, no, of course it wasn't. then you start to question yourself. And that's when we have people dreading to go to work and questioning whether they're really good at their jobs, or, what did I do? Especially like if we are neurodivergent, and, like more and more of us are discovering now in our 40s and 50s that actually we weren't diagnosed, but that extra sensitivity, the RSD, and that kind of being more of an empath, because that's a trait, but also that kind of RSD where like you're really sensitive. So again, and with autism as well, all of it, it's kind of like those throwaway remarks that someone makes that they don't realize they can really impact people. So that kind of like, I want to see you in my office next week, where nobody actually tells you what it's about, that leaves you, that leaves people having an anxiety attack all weekend, or they don't sleep, or they don't eat. And so instead of just saying, look, this has happened, let's talk about it. I mean, I always think it's best to talk about things not in a moment of panic or anger, but if something's happened, it's always better to talk to people as soon as possible, isn't it? Not leave them hanging for a week by the, we've all got dogs. It's like telling your dog off after they've done something, they've forgotten all about it. So yeah, if we don't deal with things when they happen, it's less likely to get resolved in a good way, isn't it? And so I think as well, we have to kind of, the behavior is about them, not us. And it's really hard when you're in that situation of being bullied or being made to feel small or whatever it is that makes you feel rubbish, is to think that that person's targeting you. And I think it's really good grounding for all of us is to remember that other people's behaviour is always about them.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. And so I guess now we want to try and flip it and say, okay, we know that some people are having these behaviours because of fear or competition, scarcity mindset, all of that kind of stuff. So what's the reverse of that? How do we flip it so that we build sisterhood? And even if there's only 2 of you or 3 of you at that level in a whole organisation, how do you make sure that you're there for them and you're showing that sisterhood? So both of you, how can you speak to that?
So for me, I think it's around, first of all, ditching the scarcity mindset. It's recognizing that sisterhood isn't, something that's nice and fluffy that we see on Instagram. It's actually what we do, what we choose to do. And it's kind of like mentorship over gatekeeping. So I'll give you an example. We had a dispensing robot, first in the country, and the person in charge at the time, she wouldn't let anybody else touch it. Because she wanted to, that would take away her power if anybody else knew how to work this thing. As soon as I got that position, I was like, everybody's going to learn. I don't want to be the only person. I don't want to be called in at midnight because it's broken. Like, let the whole team learn. Why should they rely on me? So it's that kind of, like making sure everybody gets to share, and, not gatekeeping. Sponsorship as well. And I think, we talk about mentorship and coaching, but we don't talk enough about sponsorships, advocating for the other women in your team. Like, maybe there won't be a promotion in your department or your organisation, but you can still be celebrating the people in your team that are brilliant in other rooms where they might get an opportunity. And so kind of like, surely as leaders, we want our team to flourish. We want them to do better than us. We want them to take what they've learnt from us, bring their own magic and go and be even better than us. That's the sign that we've mentored somebody really well, isn't it? That they're actually, we're in retirement and they're kind of the next generation of best leaders. So I think there's that. And then there's the advocacy, isn't there? There's like speaking up if it's safe to do so. And if it's not, if you're in a team meeting or something happens, but even just afterwards, going to that person, acknowledging them and saying, I saw that wasn't very comfortable. So if it wasn't comfortable for me, how are you feeling? Just know that there are people that have noticed and kind of were on your side, and just giving somebody that kind of, just being able to start the conversation gives people a little bit of hope, doesn't it? Because it's any kind of bullying is isolating.
And for me, like, it's all about empowerment, because for me, I see empowerment as helping things go right, not empowering things to go wrong. And I think until we flip that switch into actually empowering people, helping people, nurturing people is a leadership skill, and companies totally buy into that, because at the moment you've got well, what were the results? What were the outputs of that, and how do we benchmark that? So we're looking at results, but actually to get those results, there's a whole raft of skills, of techniques, of listening to each other, and helping people to feel safe in the workplace so that they can come with ideas and thoughts, helping your team to know that actually they can make a mistake, and as long as they learn from that mistake, and it's going to be fine, and it's all of that. I think we reward people for the results, but I don't think we necessarily reward people for how they got to those results. And I think there's a huge shift that needs to happen because, I've been in teams, I've led teams. For me, I was like, if I've got to sit here and go through everyone's stuff and put red pen on it, because this is like going back some time, and I used to print things out and no one does that anymore. But if I'm doing that and everybody's staying here late, and there's a backlog of work, then I'm failing in my job. I might be brilliant at what I do, but I'm failing in my job as a leader. And I didn't know much about leadership at that point. I hadn't done all the leadership training or the coach training. So, but I just knew how it felt inside me. I was like, I am so dissatisfied. I love my job, but the way that this old school sort of hierarchical thing is working, the way that I was schooled and taught, when I went in at 21, I'm now, I'm older. I don't want to do it like that anymore. So I'm going to change that. And so we did it together. Me and the team co-created an empowerment plan. It was way ahead of its time, and we left on time. And we didn't have that red pen sort of filter that was going through. And, we focused on getting things right, but we focused on doing it the right way. Do you know what I mean? And it was just so powerful for me. And I was like, wow, that's what can be done when we take a step back and we empower people and empower the work. And actually, I was also empowering myself because I wanted to have a life.
Like so we used to have a lot of chiefs, they're called chiefs then, chief officers, and they would be in an office away from the department. So they wouldn't necessarily know if you had a really bad day as a team or what was going on. Occasionally might pop in once a week and kind of they were just far removed. And I know, I've been in a leadership role myself. I know you have to focus on KPIs and you have to get funding and all the other stuff that's not sexy. And, you've got to do all of that. But also like being accessible, having those sharing, like you don't have to be going in, giving the whole life drama, but being vulnerable in front of your team. And I think we when we all started probably like 30 years ago on that journey and being told vulnerability is a weakness, but it's not. Like when you can show your team that you've made mistakes and that you've got over them, that empowers them to be able to come to you. And like so in my career, especially like in medicine, if people feel unsafe and they hide mistakes, that's more dangerous than them feeling like able to come to you and say, look, I think I might have done that wrong. And us as a leader being able to follow it up with the patient, have a look at what's happened and actually have that conversation, that's twofold. Patients trust us more when we're open about and transparent about mistakes. But also for our team, it's so important. It's life-changing that they can come to us and say, I'm really worried. I think I might have done that wrong. And if they didn't do it wrong, it's fine. But at least they've come and told you. And I think as well, there's also this kind of like, there are some things that we all do in any business that we're in that are black and white. It's right or wrong. There's no room for error. But then there's other things where we can experiment. So like you said, you built a new way of having your team working together. It is about including people, isn't it? Inclusiveness and just showing them that we're human instead of this kind of like, I'm in charge, you've got to do what I say. It's having a space where people can say, I always used to say to my team, if I'm being a knob, you can tell me, like, feel free, like, I'm not going to be offended. Like, I didn't get to this position to get upset by what anybody thinks about me, but actually, I'd rather that you told me if I did something that made you feel horrible, because I've got a sarcastic sense of humour. Like, I could, blame my dad, but there's probably occasions where I've said something that I thought was funny and nobody else did. So saying to people like, don't be afraid to tell me. Like we've all got moments, haven't we, where we've done something that we could have done better.
So just to, I'm just really aware that we're running out of time, but I did want to add one other aspect of building sisterhood that for as long as I've been in the working world has always existed, but not every organisation encourages it. And that's building women's groups within companies. And it's part of what we do with Wise Women Lead, why we only do it as a female or a woman's only initiative, is because when women are already entering structures that are based on patriarchy, not only are they usually one of the few women that are in the more senior positions, they're working in a way that is built for the lives of men, really. And so there are other safe spaces that need to be created so that women can share their very almost unique experiences, and whether that is that they are the carer at home, or they have done a list of 10 things before they even left the house that morning, or they're getting the phone call from the school with regards to their sick child because they always go to the mum first, all of these things, and then trying to hold down a career, or maybe having a monthly cycle and they're somewhere in there where they're maybe a bit more emotional, or the perimenopause where their mind goes blank. This is a space where actually only other women can really understand and just hold space and listen and learn and grow and share together. So for any listeners that are thinking about how do we support women in our workplace, either get in touch with us or start talking to HR about maybe setting up a women in leadership forum or a women's forum, because just that act in itself is starting to build that sisterhood that we can trust one another. But I just wanted to bring that in right at the end because it's another practical thing that you can do. But I'm going to hand over now to Karen just to close off the podcast.
What an amazing conversation. And I just love it when women come together and we share from our hearts, but also from our experience. This is not just head work, it's so much more than that. So Rachael, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing your amazing experience and your wisdom with us, and your real life truths as well, because that's always really great for us to hear. What is the one key takeaway before we fully sign off that you want to drop into our listeners' ears right now?
So I had 3 challenges for people. One was be the ally you once needed, even if it feels uncomfortable for you. 2 was get real about your own biases. Yeah. So, be honest with yourself, because that's the first step to tearing them down. And we all have them. Like you said, we've all struggled to get to that seat. There's going to be things that we've inherently learned that we need to unlearn. And then the 3rd one is step outside your circle. So like mentor, support people whose experiences differ from your own. And I think, Lucy just said about circles and asking HR. For me, as a kind of bold, disruptive leader, I'd say we don't need to ask HR's permission. Just find that group of women, go and have lunch together in the park, or go to the pub on a Friday after, whatever it is, but create your own circles.
Yeah, I think there's that place, isn't there, of like whatever you need, go out there and create it and find the different doors and walk through the different doors. And that could be a conversation with someone. It might just be, this is where we're meeting. Let's do it. And I love that, because no matter what, it's about getting the right support into the right hands for women. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it's a quick reminder from us to say, go check out Lisa Jedden's Menopositive podcast for inspiration and comfort for all of you entering this different phase of life. And thank you so much for listening and tuning in to Say It Sister. If you love this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your work bestie. Until next time, keep saying it, sister.
That's it for this episode of Say It Sister. If it moved you and made you think, or made you feel seen, hit follow, share it with a sister, and leave us a review.
And remember, your voice has power and your essence is wisdom. So speak your truth and live a true and empowered life. Until next time, say it, sister.